Hi everyone, welcome to episode 7 of our podcast. We're going to jump into today straight away because we've got so many questions. First thing we want to say is it's actually a pretty big announcement today. We are going to make our very first course that we worked on, the pronunciation mastery, 100% free from today, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
We decided that one of the reasons we're doing it is because we want to spread our brand about a little bit, get it out there, and therefore give as much access to people as we possibly can. But also, the pronunciation course is kind of a prerequisite to our flagship product, the Mandarin Blueprint Method. So if you're an absolute beginner, the Mandarin Blueprint Method is for you, but you need a basis in pronunciation. So we thought, why create that barrier? So we're just going to put it out there for everybody to use free of charge.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea, this is a good course. It's got 180 videos. It's got 9 ANKI decks plus 2 bonus ANKI decks and loads of PDFs and all that good stuff. And we're giving it away for free because, what are you going to say to somebody? You're an absolute beginner and start with the Mandarin Blueprint Method, but you don't know about pinyin or you don't know about pronunciation. It seems like if we then say, and we have this expensive course on pronunciation, previously it was $150. So it's now down to $0. So we thought that was too big of a barrier to entry. So now it's free for everyone. And regardless of whether you're a beginner or you're advanced, check it out because, any advanced learner can improve their pronunciation almost definitely. So, it's a good chance for you to improve in that way.
Spent several years on that.
Yeah.
Technically, and, hundreds of hours testing it, getting feedback from 200 or so clients, 250 or so clients. And yeah, it's kind of our first,
Last winter, I was that's all I did every day from morning to night, just editing the videos. And for me, it feels very much like it's our first product and it was our first video course. So we always feel like it's very special to us in that way. And I figured we'd start off the listener feedback, comments, and questions with something about this exact thing, which is a comment left on the very last video of the pronunciation mastery this week from DEBRA JANSEN, and she says, absolutely brilliant course, gold standard for how to teach a language. Well, high praise. The videos are excellent and precise. You do them in a soundproof booth, and that produced crystal clear sound quality. I'm totally impressed, and your enthusiasm, ability to engage, great supporting documentation, and ANKI decks have produced a complete package that I've enjoyed immensely. I'll leave a Facebook review as well. I look forward to starting the character course. Well, thank you. That's the most of what I can say. And I'm just so glad that you got a lot out of it. That was the goal. We just want you to be able to say everything in Chinese accurately. It's absolutely the best way to start because you're going to be able to understand people better. You're going to be understood more. And so thank you, Deborah, for that ringing endorsement. And to everybody else, that ringing endorsement is representative of a now $0 product. So check it out.
Next one we've got is Chad Ressler for level 5 complete.
So this will be in the Mandarin Blueprint Method, yeah.
One of the key points Phil made was about 0 days.
I think he meant 0 days off. Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually something...
Or no 0 days.
I saw this in a Reddit post years ago before we started Mandarin Blueprint, and there was this really just motivated guy giving a post. And that was one of his mottos, like never have a 0 day. Never have a 0 day. Just do if you've done the whole day without doing something towards whatever it is you're working on, in this case obviously Chinese, just do one character, just watch one video, just listen to one 10-minute podcast, whatever it is. Just do something before going to bed. Never have a 0 day. So he continues, says, working through the levels, you definitely reach a point where not working through a lesson or practicing pronunciation throws your day off. Phil also mentioned that there will be days when you will do a lot of videos versus days when you might only do one. When you have days where you are working through a lot of videos, be sure to use time boxing, the method that Phil discussed in previous videos. In level 5, I saw the chance to do several characters, as many in this level are related, and I abandoned time boxing to try and power through them all. As a result, I had to take a day away from we burnt out, basically. Had to take a day away from working on new characters because I really didn't develop good movie scenes for them, and I've had to spend more time reviewing them. However, the day spent away from characters meant reviewing a lesson from pronunciation mastery course as well as working on ANKI. So, sorry, he didn't really burn out in this case. That can happen if you try and do too many at one time. But he just I guess you could just say he rushed through them. Now, we often encourage rushing through them, or just to try and take the training wheels off and see how fast you can do it, and then just see what ANKI says. But one thing he mentioned there was time boxing. So do you want to tell them a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, well, I think this makes a lot of sense what he said here, because time boxing is basically where you take, it's pretty ideal to do with the pronunciation course and the character learning course if you're at the beginning. So time boxing would be, for example, you take 10 minutes and you focus only on the pronunciation course. Could be the reviews, could be the actual video content, and let's just say you do that for 10 minutes. Then you take a 2-minute break and you check your email, you check WeChat, you do whatever during that period of time, and then you start 10 minutes on a different task. So you go to 10 minutes of the Mandarin Blueprint Method and learning a character. Or there's a million iterations. You could do, I'm learning for 10 minutes and then I'm reviewing for 10 minutes, or I'm learning, whatever. But the main thing is that what you're doing by doing this 10-minute, 2-minute break and then switching between activities is giving your unconscious a chance to process what was happening in the first session while you're doing the second session. So again, it's unconscious processing, but it's incredibly well researched that if you let something process in your unconscious, you'll be able to more quickly recall it and bring it up you'll be able to more quickly acquire the knowledge and learn it, in that way. So I think that this is probably because, if you imagine that you're just doing characters, you're kind of focusing the energy in your brain, like the actual energy moving between neurons on one spot. And just like if you're at the gym and you're lifting weights, if you only did one exercise and you never move to another exercise, you're going to wear out that muscle group really quickly. Well, maybe you're wearing out that neuron group too quickly if you only focus on one thing. So by time boxing, you jump around to different things and give yourself an integrated chance to, give your brain a chance to process it and rest.
But I would say that as you progress through the Mandarin Blueprint Method, it becomes automatically varied anyway, because as you progress, the more later on, the characters have, I guess you could say, more bang for their buck. Like, so you learn a character and it can unlock 3-5 words, and each one of those 5 words might have a couple of uses each, and each one of those uses has a sentence and then dialogues, and later on we're also adding stories and stuff like that later as well. So as you progress through, you're going to naturally, so you wouldn't have to categorize them. You could just say, I'm going to spend 30 minutes doing just Mandarin Blueprint Method, but do it all in order. So a word comes up, you go and learn that word. Or then you review you create the flashcard for it. And you maybe review the flashcard, and then you look at the sentence, do the same thing, and then go back to the next character, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of theory behind why we were happy to do it that way, because, again, like you said, it automatically mixes it up. So if you have a make a movie lesson followed by a new vocabulary unlocked lesson, you're going from one way of thinking, which is a mnemonic visualization to remember everything about an individual character, to learning how that character combined with the character you previously learned, how do they relate to each other and how can they be used in a sentence? It's just a different type of thinking. So the fact that you're switching around like that can really help. And that's not to say that you can't take another approach where you just say, I'm just going to focus on characters. But if you do that, then definitely at least take a little break every 10 minutes or so. And by the way, we have an article about time boxing. It doesn't have to just be that 10-minute, 2-minute break thing. There's a million other variations. But
check out ajat.com, AJATT, all Japanese, all the time.com. That's where we got really inspired about time boxing, because the official time boxing technique is called the Pomodoro technique. Sorry. 25 minutes on, 5 minutes rest. 25 minutes work, 5 minutes rest. But there's loads of different variations you can do to mix it up, and you can work on 3 different things, 4 different things at the same time, and all this sort of stuff. So go and check out our article, but it's basically based on his article as well. So you go and check out that too. Learn about time boxing. Get Zen Timer for your computer. Yeah. It's a great time boxing app that you like to use.
Yeah, I've used it a lot.
And start employing time boxing. Start integrating it into your study routine. It will pay off massively.
Okay. So next we have a series of comments that are specifically focused on actors that people chose to represent a pinyin initial. So this is, if you're unfamiliar and this is the first time listening to the podcast, when you do a mnemonic visualization in the Mandarin Blueprint method, you have to have something that visually represents the first letter or two letters of the pinyin pronunciation. And so we gave a bunch of suggestions. You can pick people from your life. There's fictional characters involved. There's world leaders involved. You can pick celebrities and things like that. But by no means do we give an exhaustive list because, you know, first of all, we don't know your family members. And also the fictional universe, I mean, come on, it's practically infinite. So we encourage people to give their suggestions. And so here are 5 suggestions that people made. The first 2 both come from the casting call for the letter F. So you want to think of somebody who has an F in their name. And I thought both of these were pretty funny. Yeah.
So the first one is Jim AWOFADEJU. I chose Felix Lattman as my actor for the F initial. Now I know who this guy is straight away. Again, it was around about the same time we started up Mandarin Blueprint. I found this guy. He runs a really popular course on Udemy about learning Chinese. He's got a great personality, and he's inspired us in a way as well, like how to to put in a lot of effort into our videos and energy and stuff like that. He's great. He's the founder of Domino Chinese. You can check out dominochinese.com. He has videos related to China, Chinese language, Chinese culture on YouTube and Facebook. So
yeah, he definitely is a funny guy. He's got a good personality in that way.
Yeah, I believe he's focusing a lot on Swedish now, but yeah, he's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah.
Another one from Chad. Again, letter F, choosing a person for that. He chose Phil Crimmins. That's this guy.
Yeah. So I thought this was funny because, well, first of all, it's a point about sound. My name starts with PH, but it sounds like F, so it's like that's fine. But it's also interesting because it shows just how good we are at recognizing faces because you can find somebody. I mean, both of these are people that from the internet. Felix or myself, it's just people you saw in videos on the internet, but it works. You can still imagine it. And so it's kind of incredible that we're able to have such quick facial recognition in that way.
Yeah, so thanks, Chad. Another one from Jim. Chose my mother to represent the actor for the YI or E initial. Her name is spelled Irina, which would be pronounced as Irina. Yeah, we got that right. But pronounced Irina in her native language, Russian. So excellent. So it's really personalized. Jim's very good at personalizing everything. Yeah. So that's great.
And that's a hard one too. Like of all the actors that you have to choose, there's 55. I always find that E one to be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of times sounds don't start that way. But then in the case of Russian, you have something like that. So that's kind of cool.
That's right. Chad Ressler again on character 45, Hua, as in 变化, to transform. The casting call for H. Hahou Mo, Donnie Yen's character in Kung Fu Killer. I haven't seen that one, but I'm a big fan of Donnie Yen.
Yeah, and so he picked, and also for the next one, they're fictional characters that represent everything that relates to the U sound. So in that case, it was Hua, Hua, right? So that was why he picked a fictional character in that case.
Yeah, and one more for Luan, so it's Lu, so it'd be another fictional character chosen by Jim. Lu is Lola Bunny, Bugs Bunny's crush.
Yeah, classic stuff. So, all of these are perfectly good, and I really liked how personal they were getting, especially Jim. I mean, yeah, like you said, he's very good at that. And if you make it somebody who you have a connection with, then you just invite the scene to have a different type of feeling. And we were talking about the differences between when you time box, having a different thing going on when you move between different activities. Well, there's even that built into the mnemonics because every scene, every character that you learn is going to have a different actor with different traits and different props. And so, who knows where your brain's going to go with that. So, yeah. All right. Next, we have a question it's a bit of more of some notes about the None of Us Are Bad at Languages bonus video. So Jim says, you said that we all have innate ability to acquire language. However, a lot of people point to the quote-unquote language barrier when it comes to moving to another country or seeking work opportunities. Does the notion of a language barrier exist because people think they are bad at languages? Maybe such people tried learning foreign languages but never learned how to learn a foreign language properly. I think anyone who is studying a foreign language or thinking about studying a foreign language should ask, how would a linguist study a language to the point of acquisition? That's what you did during phase 2 of your Chinese learning journey. So, yeah, I like what Jim's pointing out here. I mean, the language barrier thing, like, I don't think anybody thinks that, just because we have the innate ability to acquire language, that therefore it happens instantly. So the language barrier to some degree is like, it takes some time to get to the point where you're fluent.
As far as I understand, the language barrier is simply, I don't speak your language.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
Like, that's what I thought it was. But
yeah, so I mean, it's not. Of course, the language barrier exists because it's not an instantaneous process. That would be nice. You just download it into your brain or something. But I do think he's right that people will think that they are bad at languages and therefore kind of shoot themselves in the foot right off the bat, because if that your attitude will massively affect how you spend your day-to-day time. And so if I think, I'm just no good at math, then if somebody hits me with a math problem, I'll immediately go, well, I'm bad at this, so I won't even try. And so if you can get rid of that idea that you're bad at acquiring languages, like many of our past clients had, and we luckily were able to convince them that it's not true, then you'll at least get this, unnecessary self-made barrier out of the way.
And I think, the key point of this is many people that have tried learning have never learned how to learn a foreign language. And it's one of the key things I say, I believe in that video, or maybe the little video before it, but we are taught the wrong way how to learn languages. We're taught in an academic way. Mm-hmm. And, not to blame teachers themselves, but it's just the way the system's set up. It's just easier to test that style of teaching. So but it's a shame, because before learning a language effectively, for most people anyway, you first have to unlearn all the stuff you were taught in school. You don't really need grammar explanations to that larger degree. You don't really need a textbook and a tutor and a blackboard necessarily.
Yeah, the one that really got me when I was in university, when I really just thought about how unnecessary it is like we would take 3 words and talk about what different contexts you might use these 3 words. And I remember just thinking, we're talking about such detailed stuff about how because 4 years, it doesn't take 4 years to learn a language. So it's like the academic 4-year degree. It's like, all right, we got to fill this with something. So they do something like, we're going to compare.
You learn about a language, don't you? You don't necessarily learn the language itself, unfortunately.
And that to me was just like way overkill. All right.
So Sydney Green is the next one on Thai, as in too much, too excessive, whatever. Great job, Phil, with the 5th podcast. Thank you. It was a mammoth task, but you made it so helpful and interesting. Well, congratulations to Luke and his fiance, and I wish them every blessing in their coming new life together. Thank you. Is the le at the end because it is assumed she didn't look beautiful yesterday, or is it there for another reason?
Yeah. So he was saying, "太漂亮了" was the sentence, and this is something that's kind of an interesting thing. So first of all, the Thai adjective le is a set phrase in a way, but really what it is it's hyperbole is what's happening there. So if you say to some, if I say to Luke, "你太聪明了," I'm not literally saying
you're too smart.
You're too smart. Stop being so smart. It's actually a problem. No, I'm just saying oh man, you're too smart, man. Like it's like that's
it's contextual.
So the point being that theoretically you could say that she looks better today than in the past or whatever, but the idea here is that most of the time with too, there's an implication, if it were literal, that it wasn't that way before. So if I were pouring water into this, there's a glass in my hand for the audio listeners, but if I was pouring water into the bottle and then suddenly there was too much water, I would say, 太多了, because before it was fine, but then, now there's less. So the le does have a technical usage there, but in this case, it's just hyperbole.
I could just think of an example to explain it quite easily, which is, so a boyfriend saying to his girlfriend, 你太漂亮了. It's just like, you're so beautiful. Whereas a girlfriend saying to her boyfriend about his work colleague that he just went for lunch with, she might say, 她太漂亮了. She's like, she's too beautiful. You're not allowed to have lunch with her. So that's a good way to sort of remember it.
Sure.
So it can be both of those depending on the context.
All right. So
another one from Jim for character 17.
Well, just briefly. This is this section here is just like we did before with the all the people picking their actors. This one is going to be a set of props that people picked, and props are where you pick an object to represent a character component. Now, sometimes this is a pure character component, like Ren, which will be on the left side, or 三点水, which is like 3 little lines that represent water. But sometimes they're a full character that is a component in a later character, because characters get more complicated as you move on. You'll notice this very quickly as you start to learn Chinese, that the majority of characters, really, they contain full characters within them. So they can also be used as props, objects to represent a character component. So
one of the key elements that the memory athletes use to make memory palaces to remember all this crazy stuff.
Right.
People, places, objects, and actions.
Right.
And they all represent different things. Right. So yeah. So we've got Jim here with character 17, Ba, number 8. Pick a prop for those 2 lines that represent number 8. And he thinks that, he says, do you think wooden legs such as those on a pirate would be good choice of prop to represent Ba? And I just thought immediately that character from Family Guy, with like the 4. He's got 2 wooden arms, 2 wooden legs. But I was like, yeah, that's fine. That's give you whatever actor is in that scene in which with those two sort of lines with that Ba prop. Yeah, give them wooden legs. And I also said, I remember I replied to him and I said, it's a good chance to bring in some sort of audio effects as well. Like you can hear the clunking of the wood on the floor, and you can maybe kick stuff with it, and it has a different feeling to it as well. So it gives you a chance to bring in some other senses to that scene.
Next, we have a prop from Chad on character number 47 for Bai, to pick a prop. And this Bai, the original character, means 100, or 100. If you rotate the character counterclockwise, it sort of looks like 100, and I can see what he means. And so he says, I'm thinking of imagining like a giant, bedazzled, rotating number 100. So this is an interesting one because what he's, it'll probably work, but, it's a little bit against the rules because digits and letters are kind of, the whole point of this is to make a visual representation that we're better at recognizing than letters or numbers on the page. That's, in terms of our evolution, those are brand new things that we've figured out how to recognize. But when it comes to this, you'll probably remember it, but I did think when Chad sent this, this reminded me when he talked about the rotating number 100. I don't know if you have this in England, but in America, there's this daytime game show. It's usually on at like 11 a.m. or something, called The Price is Right.
Yeah. And, we had the same. We had our own version.
Oh, okay, yeah. So at the end of The Price is Right, when there was like a contestant that reached a certain point, they would spin this wheel, and if it landed on $1, which didn't have a decimal point, just said 100, that was a big thing, and the lights would go off and whatever. So if I imagine Bob Barker and the big wheel there and somebody spinning it, that could be a way to move the bedazzled 100 into something that's a bit more visual.
So remember that, guys. You don't want to imagine anything that is an actual character, an actual letter, or an actual number, unless it's really obvious. Like, I remember looking at this and I was like, well, the number 100 is so round and easy as an object, but that's the whole point. We're trying to transform everything into a recognizable, simple object to make it easy.
Yeah.
So because that's what our brains are built for. So yeah, try and avoid doing that if you can.
All right. So next we have Jim again. He says, my chosen prop for Ma, which is the character for horse, is the Trojan horse of the Trojan War in Battle of Troy. Great pick. I just thought of a keyword association for Ma, horse. The keyword association is 2 basketball players playing a game of horse, H-O-R-S-E. I played that a lot as a kid. For those who are unfamiliar with the game, horse is when one basketball player takes a shot on the court or does a trick shot, and the other basketball player has to shoot the same shot and get the same result. If one basketball player misses the first shot and the other basketball player makes the first shot, then the player who missed the first shot gets a letter H. And so, you count that up to H-O-R-S-E. I remember playing this as a kid, and we would do the most crazy, like over the head, hook shots, whatever. And whenever you managed to make some crazy trick shot, you were just like, yes, no doubt.
Yeah, so it's very personal, but I've got to say, I'm not really in too much to support this one, because when you're thinking of keywords, keyword connections, like a visual, you're thinking of a visual representation of the meaning of the character. But it doesn't mean, guys playing basketball. It means the animal, the horse. So really, as a rule, you want to make sure that you imagine an actual horse of some kind. Otherwise, well, it's just not the way it's done.
I think that in this case, it's you're right, and it's probably better to think of an actual horse. I mean, I do think that if you remember the word horse, you'll be okay. But there is an exception to this, which is, take this for example. So we have a character that we teach, 句, which means sentence, and a sentence, as in like what it means is a sentence like you write down a sentence or you say a sentence.
Right. It's very abstract,
but obviously there's another use. There's a not homonym. No, is it homonym? Synonym? Well, no, it's another another definition for the same word sentence, which is to sentence someone to a penalty or sentence someone to death or something. And so we would say that because that is quite visual, you can imagine the jury standing up and saying, we say he's guilty, you'll sentence to death, and the feeling around that the simple connection to the fact that it's just the alternate definition in English is enough. And then you'll remember the character, and you'll know that it doesn't mean that when you see it in context. So it is okay to do that sometimes, but in this case, horse is super
it's a horse.
Concrete. Yeah. There's no need to necessarily
simple,
make it too
And also, even in that case, I can think of a way around sentence, it's like a fortune cookie coming out of a sentence. It's there's all sorts of ways you can always work around to represent the keyword meaning as close as you possibly can. So again, Jim, we love how personal that is, and the Trojan horse is a fantastic prop. But
I think the Trojan horse is like a much better keyword connection to begin with.
That in itself would be great as a keyword connection and a prop. You can keep them. You can keep whatever keyword connection object you use to represent the meaning as a prop. If that character is then used as a prop in other characters. So,
All right.
Ryan Smith. On character number 74, SHÀNG, as in on above or on top of. And for that, as a prop, we recommend something to do with God, because imagine whatever God that you associate with.
So it's God above, right?
Yeah, God above, exactly. So related to God, he said, I'm imagining the iconic pearly gates to heaven.
Sure.
And that works. I mean, there's another character later on, Tian, day or heaven, which we also recommend as the pearly gates, but of course it doesn't matter. You can just choose something else when you get to that.
Yeah, there's plenty of options.
Yeah. Another one from Jim here. My original choice of the prop for R, he's on character 20, pick a prop for that, which means sun. Sun. The component was sexy human legs, because it looks like human legs. But I'm considering changing it to mannequin legs instead. What do you think? And I remember I replied to this. I'm just trying to think, what did I say? It was something, I basically said that it doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter. But I personally would find mannequin legs easier because they're actual real-life objects that I can imagine interacting with. Yeah. Whereas human legs, like if you're imagining just a pair of like animated cut-off legs, that's really engaging, but it's also slightly harder for me to imagine because I have to literally I've never seen that, and hopefully you haven't either. So I have to make that up in my head.
It's not a human legs, but from the Addams Family, there was was it called Cousin It or The Thing?
I used to imagine The Thing.
That's a hand, but it's a similar.
That was my hand prop.
Oh yeah,
yeah, nice. For my thing. So
yeah, it's definitely possible. But I do like the idea of mannequin legs because, like you said, it's just like you could just imagine using them. And
but you can answer your own question for these sorts of. You can answer these sorts of questions yourselves by thinking what is easier and more entertaining and more memorable for me personally. Mannequin legs, human legs. Oh, okay, human legs, brilliant. So I'll just do that. So all right. Fantastic. Another quite long one from Jim.
Yeah, sure. This is about comprehensible input. So he says, it's true that comprehensible input, reading and listening to messages we can understand, builds our language modules and eventually allows us to produce the language comfortably and fluently through speaking and writing. Well articulated. I think it's also true that people acquire their native languages and foreign languages at different rates. Yeah, that's probably true. For example, let's talk about English as a native language. Some babies spoke their first word of English when they were 15 months old, while some babies may have spoken their first English word at 20 months. No matter at what age the baby spoke their first word in English, I don't think their parents were rushing them to speak as soon as possible. Likewise, I don't think adults should feel like they should speak their foreign language as soon as possible. Do you agree with the points I made in this comment, and would you like to add anything else? Well, I certainly agree that in the beginning you should not worry about how quickly you start speaking, because there is a bit of a natural process to it. You should recognize that what will make you want to speak and want to engage in conversation is hearing and reading a lot of stuff that you understand. I mean, the idea that you wouldn't want to say what you know how to say that you've heard 50 times when you're around Chinese people is kind of a little bit crazy to me. Maybe if you were super shy and introverted, but like imagine that you understood some sentence 50 times and it's the perfect time to say it in a conversation, but you're just like, no, I'm not going to say it. Like,
sure, but there's also like some people that do have a time limit they set themselves. Like, what was that guy's name? Was it Charles? The guy that was like he's got a Chinese wife and he's given himself a year.
Yeah, I've forgotten his name.
Sorry, mate, but he's like, I want to do this in a year. So if that's the case, then then invest more time and money in targeted speaking practice, of course.
Yeah.
But if you're just you're learning Chinese, you just want to learn the language as quickly, but also you don't want to push yourself and rush yourself to speak. Don't do that. You don't need to. That's not the most important part, believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, there are things, like we brought up Katsumoto before, and he's a big advocate for doing
I didn't actually say his name, actually. That's the
the AJATT.com guy. He has, he's into non-comprehensible immersion at the beginning, which is, not as good as comprehensible input comparatively speaking, but it's, you don't have much you can comprehend at the beginning. So if you have the language that you're trying to study playing in your house all the time, like you just set up a speaker somewhere and it's always playing, then you're at least exposing yourself to the language more. And I imagine that if you had a baby who, always had some like English language or native language, content playing around them, they might pick up their first word a little bit faster than if you didn't. But on the other hand, it's kind of in the same way that the parents don't worry about it. I don't think you should worry about it either, because worrying is unfortunately the enemy of language acquisition. If you're anxious about it, then you put yourself in a different state of mind where you're not just
learning.
Yeah,
really.
Right, yeah. So, certainly language acquisition is any learning, and particularly language acquisition. All right.
So another one from this is Ryan Smith hasn't sent. This is the only one from him this week, isn't it?
Oh, he said an example up earlier in the cast.
Oh, he did, yeah.
In the props.
Ryan Smith. On the most recent episode, number 5, someone asked if learning Mandarin had given you more refined sense of hearing. Your response was that we weren't really sure. So I thought I might provide you with another person's experience with this. My personal background, I have a bachelor's in linguistics and a master's in computational linguistics. So I have studied a fair amount about phonetics. In addition to that, I've trained myself to have a decent ear for a large list of languages: Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, Russian, Finnish, Georgian, French, Dutch, and a number of others to varying degrees of accuracy. Wow. With all of this, one might think that I've developed or was just gifted with a spectacular ear for languages, but the truth is I really don't. Every time I start training myself with the sounds of a new language, I start with the same confusing experience as everyone else. Having prior experience with a larger number of consonants and vowels then gives me the a slight head start, but it still is always muddled with how they interact in this new language. The only thing that really gives me an advantage over anyone else is just the knowledge of how to study the sound system of new language, along with prior knowledge of what things like pharyngeal or palatal consonants means. Of course, that's just my personal experiences with language learning, but I've known people who pick up languages much faster than me, and to me seem to have special abilities where all I have is the willing to put in the time and effort into it. And that's great. And I think that, like they say, it's talent or whatever is 99% or some sort of very high percentage hard work and effort, and it's not actually and sweat, so.
Yeah. I had a music teacher once say to me, I've never seen a talented musician in my life. And his point was, here's what talent would be. If somebody who's never picked up a trumpet before just walks over to one and just picks it up and just starts playing like Dizzy Gillespie. He's like, every trumpet player I've known spent hours and hours and hours on it, in the practice room. And it's like, aptitude is a thing. Of course, aptitude is an aspect. But it really comes down to, well, it's going to come up in this next question, but there was a point that, let me just actually go back up a little bit. There was a point that Ryan made here. Let's see here. So he says, every time I start training myself with the sounds of a new language, I start with the same confusing experience as anyone else, having prior experience with a larger number of consonants and vowels gives them a head start, but always sort of muddled with how they interact. And that, I think, is an interesting point, because I imagine that suppose I went to learn Cantonese. I bet that knowing Mandarin overall would help me, but it's like there would be some sounds that I would want to fall back on my Mandarin instinct because it's, you know, a different sound system. So I can see how it's both. And this was my instinct, but I didn't base it on anything. It was just my feeling about it because, you know, I mentioned in that podcast that I thought you'd think that maybe because I'm a musician that would help with the hearing of, you know, the sounds that are coming in Chinese. But I don't think so. It's a subjective experience, but I don't think it's making any difference.
Yeah, so absolutely.
It's all about the time.
Mm-hmm. And I was that just reminded me of something. I know it's not related to pronunciation or identifying sounds, but learning Chinese will help you learn other languages. Say you just know English or what have you, like we did. Learning Chinese has helped me massively in learning Spanish. Not that I've made massive progress, but I'm working, you know, a little bit every day, and I can use Chinese words and Chinese sounds to help me make mnemonics to learn Spanish words.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so that's just one aspect that just popped into my mind there. So there are advantages to developing, like as you develop more languages and skills in that area.
For sure.
Yeah,
okay. So these next two are both kind of related to grammar acquisition, so I put them together here. So we have one email from Jeffrey, and he says, "Hi, can you help me navigate on which level I will learn grammar? I've been scanning through level 25, but I can't see it. And will you have a video explaining how to construct a sentence as you do in the pronunciation mastery course?" And I'll get to that in a second. And then Jim says, "Towards the end of level 7, Phil said that understanding a sentence is how a person starts slowly building their understanding of grammar. I know that sentences aren't my focus until character 105, and I also know that there are infinite variations of sentences. I'm just curious what to expect once I reach character 105 and focus on sentences." So these are very related. So the response, I sent Jeffrey an email about this in response because, you know, it comes down to the idea that the way that we should acquire grammar is by looking at sentence structures and understanding how they're put together. Now, we're adults, and so we like to think like that. We like to go, well, how is this constructed? We're very curious in that way, in a way that children aren't. They're just sort of like taking it in. We're you know, able to conceptualize the idea of a subject, verb, object, or throwing in an adverb. We can understand that to some degree, but it is sort of categorically different than acquiring language. So what I said was, you actually have been getting our grammar materials since level 13 and learning grammar, or more specifically, acquiring grammar. Now, with that said, it's important to think a little bit about what is the process that's happening in your brain. So, you know, we brought up before the idea of 99% of talent is work and effort. It's about the days, it's about the hours more than it is about the days or the years. And what is happening anytime that you repeat a behavior? This is just based on some research that I was doing last week, and I also had heard about this before. But when you do a behavior that is either good or bad, like for me, I'm a nail biter, so that increases, that's a bad behavior that I'll keep doing, or maybe it's going to the gym every day. When you do the behavior, it increases what is called myelin on your neuron. So the neuron has got 3 very basic parts. It could go way more detailed than this, but you've got like the nucleus, which is the main part of the neuron, an axon, which is sort of the way that energy travels from the nucleus to other neurons, and then the axon terminal, which connects to the other neurons. Now, that axon is kind of like a tube. So if you look at a picture of a neuron, it's sort of the long part of the neuron. And electricity can degrade and disperse, right? So what stops it from dispersing in the axon is these sheaths called myelin, right?
Fatty sheaths.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do a behavior through a process called myelination, you add a layer to that. And so that's why people who are incredible at their, say, piano is one that always comes up to it.
That's what creates it, right?
Yeah, to some, yeah. So what if I play with a piano player named Mark, and he's so skilled that he doesn't have to think about something. We'll just say, "Hey, Mark, can you change the key to E flat?" And he just does it, right? He doesn't even have to think about it. And so what's happening there is that the myelin sheaths around his neurons are so well developed that the energy just passes through them without him even having to consciously think about it. So when you are taking in a sentence in Chinese that you understand, you could think of that as adding a very thin layer of myelin around the axon that relates to that particular language center in your brain. And this isn't something that you can do once and expect the energy to not degrade. But as you do this, what you're picking up on and what you're creating the myelin sheaths about is the pattern more so than the specifics of that individual sentence. So, you know, if there's a pattern that happens with sentences where an object or a noun or a person tends to go before this other thing, you know, maybe a verb, well, it's not the rule that you're getting accustomed to. It's the pattern of these many sentences that have the same, you know, sort of rules within them. So why do I bring that up? Well, because there is some debate about whether or not learning grammar rules is effective. We tend to kind of fall in the camp of it's pretty risky to do because it's very tempting to do. You want to like go, oh, I learned all these grammar rules because I read this book, and it can kind of lead you astray. But because there is some debate about it, we do actually have some materials about it. Those materials relate to the tags that we put in your ANKI decks. I feel like do you have a comment you wanted to say about the theory before I get into the specifics?
I was just going to, but like one little thing was just that, I mean, we're not, there's people that are much smarter than us and also that have been studying this all their lives that are, you know, that have very different opinions. So we don't want to sit here and say that we know how grammar is acquired, definitively. But so that's why we're sort of, don't want to put all our eggs in one basket.
I'm certainly more than willing to say that this is where my instinct tells me, but you know, nonetheless,
based on our experience,
and our experience and research, or whatever. But still, you're absolutely right, and there is debate about it. So I was thinking about this a few months ago. What's the best way to present this in a way that's sticking with the idea of building up those? You could think of it this way: it's building up those myelin sheaths of pattern recognition while also pointing it out to people. So we go, oh, look, this thing you already saw several sentences like this. It happens to have this structure. So what I did with the help of our Sichuan University teacher, Annie, who's been just smashing the grammar materials that we've been making, was come up with a tagging system for each sentence that shows the sentence structure, but at least with some language that's not so boring and linguistic, right? And so I might have a structure that's something like host, how, does, what, type of object. And what that would mean is that you've got a subject that has an adverbial modifier and a verb and an object. And well, the type of is a Chinese character called a dingyu. It's a Chinese grammar point where it's basically saying, you know, I could say mama, or I could say 我的妈妈. So it's what type of mom is it? It's mine. Or, you know, there's any other ways you could describe the subject, but mama is still the subject. It's like what kind?
Mama or
sure. The mother of life or something like that.
生病.
Oh, 生病的妈妈. I thought you said 生命的妈妈.
like sick mother. Would that
work?
Sure.
Right, because it's still, she's the point. Right, she's the subject. And so you say, 生病的妈妈 is a description of her, so that you would call that a 定语. And all of that stuff is, you know, if you get
so long to get my head around when I was there.
All that stuff, if you just say type of host, so what type of mama is it? Oh, it's the kind that's sick or whatever. Right. And so these aren't linguistically precise terms, but what they allow for you to do is get the basic idea and visualize it. Now, there's about 30 or 40 of these sentence structure tags, and then we have a bunch of grammar word tags and some other tags. And the answer for Jeffrey is that you're already acquiring grammar. These sentences that you have do have tags, and if you're a bit of a go-getter and you like to figure this stuff out, you can go and look through the tags and see if you can spot these patterns. But we also haven't totally finished the materials on this yet. As you guys know, this is a living course, and we're still building it up. And right now, we actually feel that the priority is to expand out the order further so that you can keep going past level 36. But we do actually have some ideas already and some plans for how we're going to present that material. But just remember that there is a whole bunch of linguistic research that says that the main thing that you should be doing is understanding the messages you're seeing. So even though it's an unconscious process, even though it's something that doesn't maybe feel so satisfying when you're just looking at a bunch of sentences compared to reading a grammar point and going, I understand that grammar point conceptually in an abstract way. it's actually helping you. It's definitely helping you. And so
it's building that myelin.
Yeah, building up those myelin sheaths. So,
isn't it just really annoying that when you were explaining all this stuff about neurons, I knew what a neuron was, an axon, and I knew what a myelin sheath was. But I don't know how to balance a checkbook or anything useful, you know?
Yes, well,
I know all of the planets of our solar system in order, but I don't know how to, make a marriage work or whatever. like why?
Well, you just have to keep
homeschool your kids, okay? That's what I'm saying. Anyway,
you just got to build up those myelin sheaths around checkbooks. But anyway, so that kind of relates to what Jim was asking, is what can you expect after character 105? Well, you can expect to get sentences that are made of the characters and words that you already know, which means that your likelihood of understanding them is incredibly high. And of course, if we do insert a word that you don't know yet, we tell you. It's like we call them top-down words, which is basically just, okay, this word is high frequency enough and used enough that you could learn it without necessarily building from the bottom up to the components and pinyin and whatever. You might just be able to learn it because people say it all the time. So we'll call those top-down words. We will give you the pinyin for those. But everything else, you already know the pinyin because you got these great mnemonic scenes for them. So as you progress through the course, when you get past character 105, you know enough to be able to start building up those grammar myelin sheaths.
Yeah, and I would like to also say we are making really good progress on building out the order. We're gonna update on that very, very soon.
Yeah,
we're really excited about it. 'Cause we've been itching to do this for so long, but just mainly just the two of us. So much stuff keeps coming up, and we're finally ready to start.
Well, luckily, all the structure, the course is in place, so it won't take nearly as long as it made to build the
really
original.
tough part is over for us. So
yeah. All right, cool. So let's go to the next question here. Oh, yeah, this is a question from Abigail, and this is one of those questions. I understand why she asked it, but it's actually not really that important. So she says, this character looks very similar to Ren, and she's referring to the character Zhu, which is...
Just like the difference between that and that.
Yeah, they are very similar. So if you look at the show notes, you'll see how they're related. And so Zhu and Ren, first of all, bear in mind that they're going to have different actors and a different set already. So the difference that you're going to come up with in your mind in the two mnemonic scenes are, the environment's different and the person there with you is different. So that's your first thing that you can count on to help you remember it. But the second thing is that when you're first starting out, let me just finish your question. So how do you differentiate between the two? I.e., in the movie scene, do you have to make it clear in what order the samurai sword and banana cut each other, right? Because those are the two props, a samurai sword and a banana. And the overall point I want to make about this is that this is something that when you're just starting, you think is going to be a problem, but then you're going to discover really quickly when you start seeing either of these in context that it's not as much of a problem. First of all, Ren is way more common than Zhu. So when you see Zhu, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's that one that looks a little bit different. And so that's the first thing, is you're not going to have a problem with this. But secondly, and also Ba, by the way, that also has a samurai sword and a banana as the prop, but it's separated at the top. Yeah. You're still not going to have a problem. But then finally, you could probably make the point about how you might differentiate between them.
I was going to say, because I think I did this lesson. I did it a little while ago now, but I remember making it. If you ever worry about things like that, you're concerned about how I'm going to remember these small differences, because there are a bunch of characters that look very similar to each other, or like these three, for example, Ren, Zhu, and Ba. So if you're worried about that at any point, because to be fair to her, she's learning the two very close to each other, right? So it could seem like you might get confused. So I would just make a point to slow down. I believe I say something like this in the actual video itself. Make sure that you see it like that. So I believe it will be samurai sword. Yeah, so from you guys' perspective, it will be like samurai sword here. So make sure that the banana is pierced on the samurai sword for this particular one. But for the other way around, maybe it's the other way. It's the other way around. Maybe the banana is sort of poked, like defending. So you can just slow, and to make it clearer, you can slow things down. You can do camera close-ups as well. So that's why we added in what we call special effects to this entire method, to sort of bring out certain details.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's always ways to do it, but I promise you won't have any trouble with this, Abigail.
Worst case scenario, you spend an extra 30 seconds trying to think of a special effect, and you go to review it in ANKI a couple of days later, and you don't get it quite right. And then you go back and you tweak it, you try again. And that's also another thing as well. The reason why we keep asking you pretty much at the end of every lesson to write out the character as you learn it, just once or twice if you want, but just once while you're learning it, and again when you're reviewing it. And that's another thing. So it's a myelin thing, you know. You want to develop that fatty sheath around the muscle memory for your handwriting is also helpful. That will also help trigger.
It's that tactile response that you get from that. It's definitely real. Cool.
So another one, Ryan Smith on ANKI decks inside level 9 complete. I love that you guys are so encouraging in these review videos. It really does a good job of making me pumped to keep going. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I mean, that it's because we believe it. You know, we know that because we experienced it. We went through the process of learning Chinese, and we had the doubts where we're like, can I do this? Everybody thinks that because it's the hardest language in the world, right? But what we realize, especially around level 9, level 10, if you've made it that far, you can start to see how this is going to work and how you're going to make it. Because when you start any big project, if you don't know the way, you're kind of like, well, maybe I'll be able to do it. And so you have to kind of, to some degree, take a little leap of faith and try to figure it out. But once you reach a certain level, you go, oh, I can see the path to the top of the mountain. And it might be a long way, but I can see how I'm going to get there. And once you reach that point, the motivation becomes self-sustaining. So, you know, if we can help provide a bit extra motivation, we'll always do so.
Yeah, and it was kind of easier for us because we were in China. We had invested time and effort in coming to China, and we were surrounded by Chinese people all day. So it was like with us, it was easier to keep pushing through, I guess, because it's like, well, I'm here now. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and figure out how this works. But for someone that's, say, in America or whatever, and you've got other things that you could be learning or other things you could be doing, of course you need that motivation and clarity and guarantee that you're going to make progress.
Right.
Otherwise, it's easier to give up, right? So, thanks.
All right, so the next 3 questions are all related to ANKI, and I figure this is a good point to remind you that the format of our podcast is always that we leave the timestamps in the actual show notes. So if you don't want to hear about stuff related to ANKI, you could just skip ahead to the next section. So the first one, Keith Wilkins says on character 19, it doesn't really matter. He says, thanks, guys. The suggestion you gave about using the suspend function in ANKI and then unsuspending them as you come up to the new ones really helped me out a lot, much less confusing for me this way. This is great feedback to get from our perspective because, you know, the whole suspending, unsuspending thing was actually something we used to do with our live students, but we thought it was a little bit, you know, sort of it was a bit finicky. It put people on, like, they had to, you know, what do you have to do? I have to suspend all the cards and then I have to unsuspend them. So we tried to come up with a different way, but finding out that this is actually still the best way is fine. You know, ANKI is, as we've always talked about, is not the most user-friendly app. So sometimes when you have things like Memrise out there that are so nice and just work so well, and then you have to go to an app that looks like it was made in the, you know, late 90s or something, it can be a bit frustrating, but it is actually quite easy. Well, just as a reminder, here's what you do. So if you want to unsuspend cards as you're going through the course, when you receive your ANKI decks, you select all of the cards and you hit the suspend button. That's either Command J in ANKI 2.1, or if it's ANKI 2.0, there's a little suspend button at the top
and
of
it's
browse.
Command @ sign. Shift @.
Is that another one in the ANKI 2.0? Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's what you do in Browse to suspend all the cards. And then what you do is you open Browse while you're learning new content. Have it next to you on the screen, next to the video course. And as you learn a new video, you unlock a new prop, you learn a new actor. First of all, you edit the ANKI card to put in your actor's name, your prop name, and you know, maybe you learned a character and you just unsuspend the card. But as you do it, you unsuspend the cards and then they go into your queue. And the only thing I would say is a one-time setting thing that you should do, which is to set your new cards per day to a really high number. Because that way, when you unsuspend the card, it'll definitely go into the queue because all of the cards are suspended. That means none of them will show up if you don't unsuspend them. So you just don't want to have that to be an unnecessary limitation. Just set the new cards per day to like 1,000 or whatever. And that way, every time you unsuspend a new card, it goes right in the queue. All right. So next we have Jay asking a question about ANKI and also writing down scripts. And like, I don't mind this question coming up a lot because I really want people to have more and more chances to hear this. So he says, hi, do I somewhere record/write down my script in ANKI, or is it just in my head? Cheers, Jay. Well,
it's just in your head, Jay.
Just in your head.
Yeah. So the the key point of this is that we don't want to rely on notes. In fact, the reason why this technique was so popular during the time of the ancient Greeks and afterwards, up until the invention of paper and things like that, and easily, and where the average person could easily write stuff down and printing or what have you. That's why these techniques were so popular back then, because everyone needed them, right? You needed, because you didn't have, the average person certainly didn't have, even like scholars and stuff, didn't have an easy way of writing stuff down, noting stuff down. So they would put everything up here. But then as computers and notepads got invented, we lost this skill.
Yeah.
But now we have it again, right? We're reintroducing this amazing skill to you where you don't need to rely on notes. So if it makes you feel better, or of course, if you want to share a story with the public on our platform, then please do write down and share it. But for your own personal use, try and stop using it. You can see it as training wheels.
Yeah.
And the longer you use the training wheels, the longer you need them, right? So get rid of the training wheels as soon as possible. It's going to be tougher, it's going to be jumping in the deep end, but it's going to be worth it in the long term.
Yeah, that reminds me of a time when I was learning some sight reading music for, I was auditioning for state jazz choir when I was a senior in high school. And I was, I'm a okay singer. I can carry a tune, but I was practicing with the very best female singer in our high school. And we were in the practice room and the piano was there. And I remember I had the metronome and the recording of the song on, and I kept going back to the recording and checking the piano and listening to the metronome. And then she just went, turn it off, stop, turn it off, go. And I was just like, what? And she was like, just go. And then we figured it out so much faster because I stopped relying on all that stuff. And it was really this cool moment. Now, of course, she was better than me, so it's easier for her to do that, but I still got her point. She was just trying to say, just jump in, figure it out, make a mistake, do it wrong, and then fix it. So, yeah. All right.
Another one from Jay West. Hi, in my ANKI deck, the picture of the na, like banana, the stroke is a square. How can I fix this?
So this happens sometimes with certain PCs or Macs that don't have certain fonts installed, I believe. Okay. And so there's not much that can be done about it relating to the font, but what you can do is paste a picture in that spot, which is totally fine to do. ANKI is, one thing that's good about ANKI is it's very customizable. So all you would have to do, and I put this comment in response to, I'm sorry, what was his name again? Jay. In response to Jay, I put this comment, and you can just search for na, which is a kind of complicated Chinese character, but it's the representation of that stroke into Google Images, and a million of them will come up, and you can just copy and put that right in. So even though the font might not have a corresponding na stroke, you can find a picture. So that's the way to do that.
Great. So the next bit here, we've got some movie scenes.
Yeah, I got two scenes.
Yeah, one from Chad and one from Ryan. So Chad, he's in his girlfriend's apartment.
Well, first of all, we should say this is for character 48, Jin.
Jin as in 今天, meaning presently or today. Yeah. So the actor, because it's J-I, that's Ji, so it would be a woman. So it would be Janice, his stepmother. And he's in his girlfriend's apartment outside the entrance because it's first tone. That's what that part of the house represents. The prop would be the umbrella at the top, a teardrop for the little dot, and Dr. Spock for that sort of looks like a kind of elf's ear. Sort of prop. So we've got three props here. My girlfriend and I are standing outside the entrance to her apartment where we first spent time. My stepmom, Janice, is there holding an umbrella, looking at her day planner. I ask what she's doing, and she shows me her day planner with today's date circled in red and a red today written in the box, and states, today is the day we make first contact.
Oh.
I guess that's a Star Trek reference.
It's just like first contact with aliens, I believe.
All of a sudden, Dr. Spock lands and walks over to us in the rain. My stepmom holds the umbrella over his head as we see a teardrop coming from his eye. He is half human after all. He gives us the Vulcan salute and says, live long and prosper. Sorry. That's really, really good. Because the whole idea of this, for those that aren't too familiar, you make the actors interact with the props and in that specific location in a way that represents the keyword meaning, the meaning of the character. And the meaning of the character is tough because when it's very abstract, obviously we give you loads of tips on how to do this. It actually is not tough after you've taken the course, but it can be tough for beginners. So think, how can I make this idea of today, concrete and obvious visually? Because it has to be visual, at least have some visual element to it. And I believe that I did this lesson as well, the actual video, and that was sort of something that I did. I had like a day planner, or I believe I had a day calendar where you rip the days off.
Right, sure.
That shows it's today, like to show this, make this abstract thing, the idea of today, real.
I just had a thought too, that could work for a more monthly based calendar, right?
Yeah.
So here's how you could do it visually, because my mom always had a calendar right on the refrigerator, that she still does.
Right.
And so you could have a day that's circled and show that every single day before it is crossed out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That would represent today as well. So this is another idea that just came to my mind just now.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what will tend to happen. You'll think of one idea, and it'll give you loads of connections to it.
Right. I did want to make a comment about his girlfriend being in the scene. So this is taking place in his girlfriend's apartment. So if his girlfriend is not one of his other actors, then this is fine because she comes with the apartment. Right? So if you're having a scene in your childhood home and you're not using your mom and dad as actors, which we recommend that you don't use them as actors, they can be there because they kind of come with your childhood home. But if your girlfriend is one of your other actors, you run the risk of confusing yourself on which particular actor it is. So you don't want to have contradictions in your scene. But if she's not one of your actors, then that's fine. And so other than that, though, I quite like it. And of course, the first contact brings Dr. Spock in, so it gets it derives inspiration for the scene from the prop, which is Dr. Spock, which is quite cool.
Yeah, good. And you don't even need to make it rain. He doesn't. I see why he did it, obviously, because of the umbrella. Yeah. It doesn't have to be raining. Yeah.
Well, and if you're in China, then there's more umbrellas on a sunny day than there are on a rainy day.
True.
So it's kind of funny.
Last one here, and last one of today's podcast as well, I believe. Ryan Smith on character number 74, SHANG, as in the one we talked about earlier, above. So why don't you walk through this one?
Sure. So this takes place in the location or the set, which represents the ending of the character, friend's bathroom in Texas. So it's the bathroom because it's fourth tone, and the house in Texas, a house where we hang out when in Texas. So I can see that. I mean, it's a bit broad, but if it works, it works. So
any connection, however tenuous, will work.
Yeah. What was yours? Not England.
Oh man, my ENG location was my first Chengdu apartment. Not because Chengdu has ENG. No. It was because it's not England. ENG. It's ridiculous, but it works every single time.
And so ANG is the final here. It's a place where you used to hang, which is also ANG. So it's a good location. All right. Props. Cigar and a crystal ball. That's correct. So you have the cigar representing the horizontal line at the bottom, and then the crystal ball makes sense because the top part of shang and the bottom part of xia they come from the character bu, which means divination. It's an ancient Chinese character. It's a very simple character. It's just two strokes. And so crystal ball is a good representation of divination. And his actor is Sean Connery. Hooray. All right. So here's the scene. Sean Connery is smoking a cigar in my friend's bathroom. That is, of course, a terrible idea and thing to do since this particular bathroom is connected to the nursery. Mentally, I can hear their crying baby hacking due to the smoke, which is a minor, unimportant detail that my mind just can't help but add in. Okay. In order to contain the smoke of his cigar, which naturally rises anyways, he reaches far above him to a crystal ball hanging from the ceiling and lets the smoke fill the crystal ball instead of just pillowing throughout the bathroom.
You mean billowing?
Billowing. It's easy to remember the above aspect because smoke tends to rise anyways. That's true. Having the smoke fill the crystal ball makes it look more like the mythical crystal ball you see in movies, sure.
But also the crystal ball was above. You had to reach above, so that works for me as well.
And this is the second time we've yelled at Sean Connery for smoking cigars. The first was with Shi, the character for 10, where thou shalt not smoke was one of his 10 commandments. We talked about that, I think, in the first podcast, maybe?
We did,
Yeah. And so, which also helps to link the scene to other bits of memory. So, I mean, Ryan's getting even better at this. He was pretty much a natural, but he's getting better. And of course, now that we found out that he's a computational linguistics master, then it's not that surprising. But well done, Ryan. You're doing great with this, and everything's in the scene. You got the cigar, you got the crystal ball, props covered. Obviously, you have Sean Connery. Adding in that little point about the baby adds emotion to the scene that would make it more memorable. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's not necessary to the scene, but with Ryan's skill at this, I'm not worried about it.
These sorts of details that, again, they'll take a while to describe, but they happen instantly anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But one thing I would say about this, just for other listeners, I'm sure it works fine for Ryan, but the idea of above may not be clear enough for the average person to, I'm not in Ryan's head, right? So, and I always say this, but it's just in case. I always like to make it a bit more clear, he's kind of because he's reaching up for the crystal ball.
Yeah, the smoke rising idea.
But the crystal ball is above the cigar anyway in terms of an actual component.
Yeah.
So you might be like, okay, what's the meaning of this character? There's a risk of that. So I would say it might be if you did this character and then in ANKI you were sort of like, okay, I remember everything, but I can't remember the meaning. That often happens. If that were to happen, then you could just make the idea of above a little bit more clear visually. So, maybe, the crystal ball is first on the ground and he lifts it up above and it's like,
or even better, the smoke like comes underneath it
and lifts it up like a lantern.
It up because smoke rises, which is the point. Yeah. So sure, that can work.
But I always like to point out stuff like that just for other listeners. It's always, you have to make it visually as clear as possible just going forward. It's like a general guideline, but that's awesome.
Great.
Well done.
That's all the comments and questions from this week. As a reminder, the Pronunciation Mastery video course is now free of charge, so you can sign up for it right away. If you have any other questions that you want to send in, leave a comment below any of the lessons in the Mandarin Blueprint Method course. We also have a 10-day free trial on that course. All these links you can find in the description. And we love this stuff. Keep bringing them in. You can also send to our email as well, support@mandarinblueprint.com.
And stay tuned for much more updates in the expansion of the courses.
All right, see you guys.
Cheers.